Hi guys and girls, I'm Karel Segers from the store department, and I'm finally back here on my trusted YouTube channel. Now you'll see that it's not the trusted background with the piano. I've moved house, and the background may change again later as the Australian summer gets a little bit too hot and I can't stay upstairs here. But that's not any of your problems, of course. In this episode, we're going to look at good and bad homages in films. I discussed that with my students recently, and I thought it's probably a good topic to bring here on the channel as well. And I have for you an example of what I didn't think was a particularly successful homage. But we'll close with one that I loved. In between the meat and the sandwich today, I brought from Sweden. I spent 2 weeks in Stockholm, and when I came back to Sydney, I watched finally the Millenium Trilogy. That's the 3 films based on the novels by Stieg Larssen around Lisbeth Salander, the girl with the dragon tattoo. The films were remade in America with Daniel Craig, and we'll also compare a short clip from that first film with a short snippet of Steven Zaillian's adaptation. But first, let's look at adaptations, or rather homages of the bad kind. So before we talk about bad homages, let's first talk about what constitutes a homage. A homage is when a filmmaker pays tribute, pays their respect to a predecessor, to a filmmaker that came before them. And they do that by quoting their work, by bringing an element of that earlier work into the new film. Now, this can be done successfully, it can be done unsuccessfully. And I've seen a few that I didn't quite like, and I started asking myself, what is it that makes one homage successful and the other not so much? So I think there's 3 key criteria. First of all, it needs to be inobtrusive. If you don't know why the scene is there, then probably the homage shouldn't be there either. So if you miss the original, if you don't understand where the reference comes from, the film and the scene should still work. In fact, you shouldn't even notice that there is something going on. The homage should be seamlessly integrated into the story. That's the first criteria. The second criteria, I don't think the power of the scene should be drawn from the original entirely. Sometimes you have these homages where the filmmaker quotes an original, and that kind of lifts the film to a level that it wouldn't have been otherwise. And I'm going to give you an example in a minute of a film where I thought that the quote was the only quality in that particular moment. There wasn't much from the current filmmaker. In other words, so all the energy, all the power came from the original work and not from the film that I was watching. And then finally, I think unless you have to do with a spoof or a scene that makes fun of another filmmaker, I think the best homages stay true to the philosophy of that other filmmaker. So we quote a filmmaker that we respect, but whose vision we also respect. So for instance, if you have admiration for filmmakers such as Ken Loach, who worked at a low budget, who worked in a tradition of realist cinema, showing the working class, then I don't think you would have an honest homage if your film is a Hollywood film that in some way or other glorifies capitalism. So, if there is a discrepancy between what the original filmmaker was trying to say and what you're trying to say, then that may not work very well altogether. All right, let's now look at a homage that threw me a little bit. I was watching Frances Ha by Noah Baumbach, which has tons of homages. It's kind of like a love letter to all sorts of French cinema and Nouvelle Vague. And, if you know the references, you can have a lot of fun watching this film. But at some point, I thought that the filmmaker went too far. And this is the scene where the main character runs through the streets of New York in the exact same way the actor Denis Lavant ran through Paris in the film Mauvais Sang, even to the exact same music. And you'll see that the energy comes from David Bowie's Modern Love. This is the scene you see at the top of the screen, the original Mauvais Sang, at the bottom, Frances Ha. So that was it. Maybe it worked for you and not so much for me. This is where I stopped the film. It's a direct quote, took all its power from the original, and I don't think that is a successful homage in my books. All right, now let's be more positive and go to the Millennium Trilogy, and we're going to have a quick look, have a short clip from The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and we're going to see how the characters of Michael Blomkvist and Lisbeth Salander are introduced in that film, and then after that we'll talk a little bit about creating tension. So here is that clip.
Det tillhör inte rutinen att vi presenterar våra researchers för kunderna, men vi har ett särskilt förhållande till din klient, så vi gör ett undantag. Ja, det uppskattar vi. Men jag måste nog varna dig att Lisbeth är en, ja, vad ska man säga, lite speciell flicka. Alltså, hur då speciell? Ja, men missbedöm henne inte. Hon är vår absolut bästa researcher. Aha. God morgon, Lisbeth. God morgon. Dirch, Frode. Jaha. Utskrifter av sms. E-mail. Bankuppgifter. Hur har ni fått tillgång till allt det här?
Det har inte du med att göra. Du beställer, jag levererar.
Lisbeth.
Vad kan du berätta för mig om Blomkvist?
Alltihop står där.
Den korta versionen.
Mikael Blomkvist, även känd som Kalle Blomkvist, ett smeknamn han fick efter att ha klarat upp några bankrån på 80-talet. Sen dess har han varit en offentlig person utan några större hemligheter, så det mesta där är artiklar som vem som helst kan läsa.
Men han har alltså hemligheter?
Alla har hemligheter.
And then we go into the introduction of the character of Michael Blomkvist. In the meantime, we've seen what sort of character Lisbeth is, and pay attention to the way she was introduced. So before they went into the room where she was sitting, they were already talking about her, and the employer, her boss, was preparing the client that he might not like her. And then the client asks why, and he doesn't give an answer. All he says is she's our best researcher. The fact that he didn't give an answer to me is critical. That leaves a tension, that leaves an anticipation, because we haven't seen her yet. So that really creates more tension and more curiosity about who we are about to see. Now, in the scene that follows, Lisbeth is going to talk about Michael Blomkvist, the other character who is going to be critical in this particular film. And she's going through his dossier, and through the details that we learn in that dialogue, we get to know a little bit about the character, and the scene ends with her distancing herself from the attitude, I think the position of the client. They're trying to get dirt on Michael, and she makes it clear that she kind of respects him. She couldn't find anything negative on him. So that's a way of basically setting up positive aspects of these two characters. And at the same time, you saw that there was tremendous tension in the scene as the client came in and he extended his hand and she refused to shake it. And that was, at this point, it was a setup. It was a plant. It was a foreshadowing of what we are going to learn about Lisbeth's story. So it's very consistent with what we're going to learn about her later on. But this is not just empty exposition. It created tremendous tension in the scene. We have two extremely opposed characters. On the one hand, this radical young girl. On the other hand, seemingly traditional conservative old man. And that contrast will play a critical role in the story of this film. So again, bottom line, you have exposition, but at the same time you have tension. A very effective scene of character introduction because the two characters are introduced. One visually through action and the other one, Michael Blomkvist, through words. I promise you we're going to have a quick look also at a snippet from the remake, the adaptation by Steven Zaillian. And I find it interesting that where the original doesn't answer the question in what way the employer believes that the client may not like her, or in what way she is different, rather. So in the original, he prepares the client. He says she's an odd girl, and then the client asks in what way. He does not answer, and I think that's powerful. It leaves that tension in the scene. In the remake, Steve Zaillian does give an answer in every way, and it doesn't say much, leaves it open, but just the fact that there is an answer to the question, I believe that does resolve some tension. And I think as a filmmaker, as a screenwriter, what you want to achieve is to keep tension as much and as long as possible. So much for the Millenium Trilogy. It was brief, but I invite you to watch the films. They're fantastic. They're very well told. They're very long, but I found that it held my attention, and I can be very critical, as you could tell from the clip from Francis Ha. Now, we're going to what I consider a great homage, and for that, we don't stay in the movies. We go to video games. Red Dead Redemption, the long-anticipated sequel to the first game, was released a few weeks ago. I haven't had the time, sadly, to play much of it, but what I have played was incredibly enjoyable, and the summum of entertainment came when there was a reference to one of my favorite movies of all time, and now we've only just learned about the passing of William Goldman. There couldn't be a better time to show you this particular homage to Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid in Red Dead Redemption. Now let's look at the game. This is not my gameplay. I found it on YouTube. This is someone who plays much better than I do. But what matters is what happens in the scene. What you need to know is just before we get to this point in the game, we have jumped from a cliff on the top of a train that is in motion. Then we have, as part of the game, we have to make the train stop, and that's when the train will be robbed, and it looks somewhat like this.
We got some fellas holed up in this last car. Ah, shit. What are you boys planning on doing in there?
So when the image goes to widescreen, or you have the letterbox, that means that it's a cut scene. This is not a playable scene, so you can't intervene here.
We will.
I work for Leviticus Cornwall.
Come on, boys.
We got our
And that was the reference.
Okay. You asked for it.
We ain't
5,
opening this door.
4, 3, 2, 1.
So the parallels continue.
On death. Wake them up a little.
So here you're playing again. You can see that the movements are a little bit more jerky. And then we go back to the cutscene, I believe.
Mr. Williamson, give Mr. Morgan and Mr. Smith some dynamite. You two boys go blow that door open.
No, you're still playing here. As the player, you place the dynamite.
But you boys in there might want to take a step back.
Seems good enough. Now light the fuse.
Here we go.
Unless you got a death wish, I'd step back, fellers.
So that was the homage to Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Let's now look at the original, and we'll start right from the point where we do jump on the train in motion.
just thought I'd watch.
Bring the kids with us. Stick your heads in.
You're just gonna get yourself blown up. You don't open that door.
I can't do that. On account of I work for Mr. E.H. Harriman of the Union Pacific Railroad. He entrusted
Will you
me...
shut up about that E.H. Harriman stuff and open the door?
What's going on?
You got a patriot in there. Okay, go ahead, News.
That's young Woodcock. He's awful dedicated.
Woodcock?
Yes, sir?
You know who we are.
You're the hole-in-the-wall gang, Mr. Cassidy. I understand that. But you got to understand Mr. E.H. Harriman himself of the Union Pacific Railroad give me this job. And I got to do my best, don't you see?
Your best don't include getting yourself killed.
Dynamite's ready, Butch.
Mr. E.H. Harriman himself, he had the confidence of me.
Open the door or that's it. You think E.H. Harriman would get himself killed for you? Woodcock?
I work for Mr. E.H. Harriman of the Union Pacific Railroad. And he entrusted me.
And there ends the scene. In the original, it was E.H. Herman. In the game, it became Leviticus Cornwall, but the effect was the same. And even if you are not familiar with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, the sequence is still a lot of fun when you're playing it, but it adds that extra dimension, and it's great to bring that element of shared Western tradition into a game as you are experiencing it. So to me, that was a very successful homage to William Goldman, who recently died. Sadly, he left a few amazing screenplays. There's Butch Cassidy, there's The Princess Bride, there's Marathon Man, and the book, Adventures in the Screen Trade. If you haven't read it, I can highly recommend it. All right, that's it for this edition of The Story Department on YouTube. If you enjoyed it, please give us a like, subscribe. That's our top prize if you could do that. And if you want to know when we're going live again, when we post the next video, just click the bell button and you will be notified. Now you can read more on the Story Department. That's our blog, thestorydepartment.com. If you are developing a story for the screen, you should check out logline.it. Logline it, that's where you logline your story, and you can run it by other people for free. Get some feedback before you lock it off and develop your story further. And if you feel that you need to upskill yourself and you would like to learn the skills of a professional screenwriter and get into the habits of a professional screenwriter, there's Immersion Screenwriting. That's the course, the online course, a 6-month online course that I've designed for you. So check it out. I hope to see you again for our next video. Thanks for watching and see you then. Bye-bye.